So, okay, we're good to go. So this is Don Adams, and I'm speaking with Michael Heleus, and we're just going to touch base on a couple of issues that may be of interest to people to people that have a connection with Michael and just care about how he's doing, and we may cover some issues that may be of interest and relevance to Sound of Stars members and also the people that are in the Michael Heleus's contact group. I just want to say something before we begin here, and that's as per usual, I've been up all night working. I look like crap. I don't usually look this bad. My hair doesn't usually look this crazy. And I haven't slept too well for almost the last 4 days, so I ask everyone's patience and understanding. And I'm just going to kind of jump into talking with Michael. And Michael, I just want to ask you, you've recently gone through some stress, and I'm guessing it's related to a lot of the weirdness that's been happening in the U.S. economy. And
I
and I
think it's probably tracking the problems with the economy and stuff that goes, I think, well beyond that. I think the, let's say, not so voluntary move I was just put through after having been in place over 7 years is time to put me in a position where I would be having difficulty, just as a critical phase of the general situation is happening also. And I believe that this follows a pattern that I went through on maybe a slightly lesser scale, which also involved such a move back in 2003. And so I'm looking to try to, on my part anyway, get some kind of a different outcome for that. Because the outcome there was the move happened, and then 3 weeks later, the Iraq War was started. So I'm hoping we don't have just a few weeks before an attempt to launch a major war this time. But the evidences are there is such an attempt going on. Now, in the meantime, there's something more serious happening. There has been action in Congress to literally strip us Americans of our Bill of Rights. I don't know if you knew that or not. It's going through the Senate, and it's up for the House soon.
yeah, it's been a topic of conversation on our groups. We heard about it recently. Pretty appalling, pretty
It
sneaky
is.
what he did there. I want to just give just a before we jump into topics like that in detail. Um, I just want to let members in our group know Michael Heleus, the person that we're talking to today, is someone whose work I follow for a great deal, and I've had a great deal of appreciation and respect and admiration for Mr. Heleus. He's done some really, really excellent work, both I think in core mathematical developments and research, and he's also done some really good work in some fringe areas that really, frankly, don't get enough attention. And Michael's been working in the field for quite some time. And I know that when I was first inspired by Michael, it was probably in excess of 10 years ago. And I don't know everything about the stuff that Michael's been going through. I know some of the details, but I know that in our group, we have members that are well known in our group and outside of our membership that have benefited from Michael, one of which is Jill Matheson. Jill took some courses and some lessons from Michael in the past, and she's written a number of books regarding musical theory, and she's interviewed people like Sherry Edwards. And I know that you, Michael, have a special place in her heart, and she has a great deal of respect for you. And another one of our members, Kat King, has a long-standing friendship relationship with you, and she loves you and cares about you very much. And she feels that she's benefited a lot just by your presence. And I wonder if you can tell us just what exactly has happened to you recently, and how has your life been upset the last while?
Well, basically, what had happened was that I was having increasing problems with my communications, and this affected other areas of my life severely, as you might expect, and it led finally to the implosion of my situation, this as my residents went.
Michael, can I just, uh, I don't know why, but I think we're getting a lot of static or feedback, and I think it's coming from your end. Is there a fan or a sound or is there a fan on right now close to you, or is there a,
No,
okay,
no, there's no source of immediate sound here. You
okay,
may be getting some kind of interpolation or static on the line though.
okay, okay,
There's been, like I say, problems with the communications, and quite possibly they're continuing now as we speak.
okay.
The sounds you're getting might be a manifestation of those too.
How far away is your mic from you? It's pretty close, isn't it?
About 8 inches.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Okay,
See, it's not like that.
okay, okay, okay. So now you were living in a home up until, well, I think it was roughly 3 to 4 weeks ago, and there was some kind of strange kind of chaotic transition there. What happened there? I mean, I know that you've left the home and you're still in Phoenix. Is that correct?
Yes, I just moved across town, and a couple of friends that I'd known for some time were willing to take me in here. A pretty embarrassing situation given what I was attempting to do. There's another person who's trying to call right now, and I want to answer her briefly and tell her I'll talk to her later.
Okay.
Back to her later.
Okay.
But this is just typical of what goes on. My communications are monitored by some people, and then they're interrupted like that because I haven't spoken to her for several days, and the timing is just interesting. And I have a situation where I've not been getting very many calls in for a long time. And then when I do, these other folks tend to interrupt right away, as if they're either psychic and tune in, which some of them are, but beyond that, I think probably it's monitored as well. The whole thing now is, if we just try to discuss this with a general audience, maybe I feel I'm simply coming off as paranoid. The only people who will understand is those who have also experienced something similar. And that, too, is a very steep gradient, because a lot of people are living in a situation where they believe, well, this kind of stuff doesn't happen, especially here, and certainly not to me. So they don't want to consider data from people like me who is actually happening.
Well, I remember a few months ago we were discussing the mathematician. I believe his last name was Finch, and you were describing to me just about some of the things that he'd gone through, and I actually, you know, upon your reference, I looked it up, and it's a pretty interesting story. Anybody else that's watching this video can look it up as well. And what you have here is, I believe, was he American or British?
Well, Steve Finch was American, as far as I know. He's living in Boston still.
Yeah.
And he had done some work that evidently got him in trouble with some of the powers that be here. I don't know exactly the nature of it, but his book had been more or less shown. So he managed to get it out through some people in France who helped on the French group. They're the ones who basically kept his work on math constants going for a while. And when he got the book out, which of course gave him more options for spreading around what he was doing, he evidently is better accepted in Europe than here. And this is a fate that other mathematicians I have known who were doing groundbreaking work also ran across. There was a fellow I knew who was working on a logical proof for P equals MT space, and he'd come across something that was very promising, so the Poles and Japanese thought, but as far as the Americans went, they simply censored him, and he lost his teaching position as a result. So America's in a situation of imposed shutdown, leading into work in various fields, while other parts of the world are being allowed to go ahead on a freer basis. This came up with yet another friend lately. Some things that his friends were doing had become exciting to prime researchers in institutes in Europe, and they were excited about people in Australia who were doing along these lines. And so we have a situation where they were interfered with also. They overcame the interference and have been able to continue. So these things are not just limited to me. It's happening with many people all over the place. I'm probably hearing only just a handful of examples.
On your reference, when I was examining some of the material that Steve Finch had up on the net, I was going through some of his papers, and there was one paper that really struck my interest, and it had to do with how to increase the probability of either successful escape or survival. And it was basically, overlaying a kind of square-like, matrix along with a spiral curve. And I'm not going to go into everything here, but I passed that paper to our membership on Yahoo, which is in excess of 2,000 people. And of course, the concepts and the math are in that brief document. Not everyone in our membership is going to be able to grasp all of that, but just trying to get that information out. And I think the important thing is that because of the nature of the content of the document, an individual or a civic body or a civilian group that wanted to increase the probability of its own survival or say its escape from some kind of tyranny, theoretically could use the basic concepts in that paper to improve their likelihood of attaining that. And I think that it's these kinds of ideas that probably got Stephen Finch into hot water, because when you think about it, does do ruling bodies or does fascism in governments really want that kind of information to get out to the grassroots? And of course, the answer, I'm guessing, would be likely no. And I'm also going to guess that probably because of some of the conceptual work that you've been doing, and I don't know all the details, and I don't know if it's necessarily the right time or place to go into all the details of what your particular account was, but based on some of the stuff that I know about your work, I can see how you might have been digging into some areas that might have upset certain interest groups, and I want to just mention something here right now. I want to ask you first, Michael, how is your health doing right now?
Well, the impact from the situation of the moon has landed, and it has exacerbated long-standing problems. So right now, I've recovered from some of the results of that. By going into too many details, it probably will not only turn some of your audience off, but may give others clues that will exacerbate that condition if they were used against me.
Are you in a situation right now though where like your day-to-day physical well-being is debilitated? Your ability to focus on.
Well, what I'm saying is there's more elements involved here in this transition that I would care to go into publicly.
Okay.
There's some very strange aspects to the situation that I'm trying to assess myself and see what I can do with it. It's very challenging, actually.
I wanted to mention just to our viewers, my impression of Michael is that he is someone who is actively involved in trying to make a difference for the greater good. And Michael also has some very unique, very rare, and not very common abilities and insights and mathematical skills. And he's been, very dedicated in how he's been trying to, apply those and continue in his work, even when he's gone through hardships. And whenever Michael's had the chance, I've witnessed that he's shared a lot of his understandings and knowledge, for free on the net. And he's also helped a lot of people out. He's helped people out in our own membership. And I just want to say that, if any of our viewers would like to offer you a hand, even if it was financial, I'm guessing they could probably send you, like, say, a donation as a money order. Does that sound? If they wanted to get a hold of you, they could probably maybe contact Mary Soul, or there would be some way, or they could email you and make arrangements. Is that correct?
They could. I would I would want to proceed with caution about that because of the circumstances here.
Okay.
I don't want anyone else getting into trouble because of my particular situation. They would have to accept that there is a risk of that.
Okay. Well,
You're asking me now for decisions about policy matters that I haven't had the ability or a chance to think about because, for one thing, I didn't think I'd be getting an opportunity like what you're offering right now at this point. Yes. So it's something I would need to take up with you to arrange for some discretion about this.
okay.
My policies are not those of the typical citizen, let's say. I made decisions early on in life. They're attacking me heavily now. There's things that would be controversial in a philosophical, political sense that impact my financial life directly. And this is something, again, I want to talk to you about privately before we go public
Okay.
video.
Okay. Well,
So,
how about we do this?
If anyone has any suggestions or anything else that they want to contact me about, feel free to do so. I certainly will do the best I can to respond in a timely manner. I can't guarantee responses to everyone, of course, but at least I would like to get in touch with some of you that I already know, maybe make some new friends along the way.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Uh, my idea at this point, and we're running this here. I don't know if we're going to edit this video or not, but if this video arrives on the YouTube channel, then in the comment section, if you're watching this video and if you're watching this, say, through YouTube, or if you're seeing it as an embedded video in one of our other forums, such as on Facebook, make sure you go to the comment section of the YouTube. It'll be right below this video. And in that comment section, you'll be able to find the email address of myself. And is it okay, Michael, if I put your email address in the comment section? If you don't want it there, it's okay. But it's your call. I mean, if you want, I can have people email me and then forward it to you.
That would be better for the moment because of the situation with respect to the timing. In fact, there's a general crunch that I've been shoved into a tandem of that needs to be addressed. And this is going to make it hard to proceed in the normal way, especially when we have a major holiday impacting the situation also.
Okay.
So let's go slow about that.
Okay.
I would have preferred to do this about a month ago under, let's say, better transits, better circumstances, both. We're just working with what opportunities we've got now, like I'm going with this with you as we are.
Yeah.
Mercury retrograde notwithstanding.
Yeah.
But take into account there's a lot of loose ends, there's a lot of considerations and knowledge that need to be brought forward in order to really understand the background of what's happening in this situation.
Yeah.
It's not all as it appears. Just remember this, the great problem with all of us is the mind. The mind has to work in dichotomies. And this dualism is the main problem we're all facing. And it's the main challenge of life to learn how to cope with and overcome this. And we need all the help we can get. But in the end, we're our own help.
Well, let's do this. For anyone that's watching this video, if you want to get in touch with Michael, just go to the comment section of the video. You'll see my email address there. And if you want something forwarded to Michael, just send the email to myself, and then I'll make sure that he gets a copy of that. And if you're watching this video and you feel like you would like to offer support in some way, which may include, say, financial support, then you can let me know, and I'll get word off to Michael. And I don't know for sure, but my guess would be, I'm guessing here that based on Michael's situation currently, that probably if you wanted to help him out, I think the only way that he could receive financial support because of how he's set up right now is it would probably have to be a money order, a U.S. money order, or a certified check made out to
Well, I can't accept checks at all.
Okay, so
And
money order would work probably. Would that like to Michael Heleus? Would that
that might work better, but even there may be some problems. We need to talk about this in
okay?
detail because of the situation I've been put in where there are parties, I believe, who expect a profit from by having been sequestered in this way. Well, they want a certain result based on my handing their money, so it may be heavily interfered with. I've already had evidence of that.
Okay, so then if you're watching this video and you'd like to help, I guess don't make a money order out. Maybe just indicate that you'd like to help Michael out, and then if we can figure out a way to make that happen, then we'll let you know. If you'd like to help Michael out in some way, once we figure out how we can get that to him, we'll let you know. I guess it's that simple.
There's a consideration that I wish to put forth here about that.
Okay.
Given that there's so many kinds of scams, phishings, and so on going on in the net.
Yeah.
In general, if there's any significant amount of money involved, a personal courier is the best way after having established mutual credibility. That would be the normal way such a thing would be done with good ethics visible.
What?
Because to attempt this over the net, it may be someone's takeover attempt or some other kind of misfeasance going on. To try to send someone a big amount of money like they promise you in these West African phony schemes, that's just obviously trying to do something dishonest.
If there was a courier involved, what form would you want the? I mean, are you hoping the courier would deliver cash, or what would you?
Well, this is something I'd rather discuss in private, but
Okay.
I want
Okay.
the public to know that in a business deal, large sums are involved. It would have to be by some kind of private envoy that's doing it correctly. I don't expect in my case that there will be any big sums or anything like that, but I am telling the public, be on your guard, because if this is being attempted over the net by an initial net contact, it's probably a phony.
I think what might happen, at least initially, Michael, is that if we have members that say want to help you out, they probably would offer. I don't know. I mean, we probably would have some members that might want to say send you $50, and there might be a few of them. I don't know.
There may be people that you're working with who have helped you too that way.
Yeah, I usually go through PayPal. I mean, when people donate or purchase my product, they usually just do it direct through a PayPal type thing.
Well, I have some comments about that I make privately.
Okay.
This isn't the time to do that.
Okay.
I do need to make them though.
Okay. Do you is there something that you'd like to share of a more like a work-related nature, like say over the last year? Is there something that you'd like to share just as a?
I'm very excited about what I've been finding. It's just that I don't see a way, given the current situation, to get very much of this current. And
Are there
to me to find a way to share what's going on because of the nature of it and because of the nature of the situation we're all in now.
Is there any kind of are there any ideas or concepts or thoughts that you feel comfortable, say, sharing with the viewers?
There's, for example, there's evidence that the ancients with their metrology have passed to us a key to the general physics of the situation we're in. I've been finding some surprising analogies lately that indicate this is a line that could be pursued to great profit to everyone, and those who can will do so. And I'm referring to things like the perimeter of Akhenaten, his capital, Akhenaten, which when put in miles, which was a unit the Egyptians certainly knew about, you have a basic physics constant that J.G. Bennett discovered in modern times, back in the 50s and 60s. And this also relates to basic astronomical data in terms of the distance between the Earth and the Sun. And it looks like we have a major key which can be developed here from these ancient considerations.
And,
so that's just a small example.
and what about that do you find personally exciting? Like what I mean, this area or this idea, like what about it, like to you, do you find personally interesting, or
Because it's one of the most cogent links between the modern physics and the ancient wisdom that I've yet seen.
Yeah.
And it shows that we're simply rediscovering what has been done before,
Mm-hmm.
and probably used in very different ways than what our current considerations would be.
Is there something that you can think of that you would share with our viewers, that you would express as to why, say, the average person would find this of value to them? Like, why? I mean, is there something that you're okay to share with in that vein? Like if the average person was to be
translate that back down, what you would need would be engineering applications of this idea. It would be translatable into something visible like technology, and hence usable and tangible. But we don't have anything that concrete as yet.
Yeah.
So this is actually a pretty abstract excitement,
okay?
because I see the possibilities of it, but none of them are actualized enough yet that I think there'd be much public appeal.
Yeah. But I mean, but you feel the excitement because you feel that there's a very real, tangible nature to it. In other words, you're in a situation where you can say, like, this is worthwhile to pursue, and you have reason to feel that way.
Right, because of the connections this information has with other information. People want to get a start on getting a handle on this. At the risk of biting off more than they can chew, they might want to look at J.G. Bennett's book, The Dramatic Universe, in 4 volumes. And I'm speaking here about information that was developed in the first volume. This easy book, you can be at this one all your life. In fact, a lot of my life's work has to do with the central ideas of Bennett's books. So I did a great deal.
What are some of the ideas that Bennett put forth that you find fascinating?
Well, basically, he sees the universe as a living organic whole. And within that, he sees how to relate the scientific ideas to the philosophical, spiritual, and essence-oriented ideas, such as found in the Eastern philosophies, Western Christian mysticism, and the like. All of this comes together for Mr. Bennett in a fairly felicitous way, and it took him and the friends he was working with some 40 years to get this information together and write it up. In fact, the writing of the book itself has spanned some 10 years, and he did dozens of revisions of it. So this is no kind of book. It's been done in such a way that many of the common problems of reading and learning have been smoothed some. And the results of just attempting to read it yourself and wondering what did he really say is worth the effort. It's available still for Bennett books, and while I normally don't care to act as a bookseller, I'm saying this one is one you might look at. Another one along a similar line, which is a speculum of all knowledge, where it's made briefly accessible and in enough depth that it can lead you further, would be Rodney Cullen's book, The Theory of Celestial Influence. Maybe now you're familiar with that one.
And sorry, the author again was?
Rodney Cullen, C-O-L-L-I-N, and it's Theory of Celestial Influence.
No. I haven't.
Read that book. Pardon?
Thank you for the reference. I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, don't miss it. It's a good gateway to what Bennett has done on a larger scale. It's completed itself in a beautiful gem of writing, but don't miss Bennett either.
Yeah.
Because there, you get a key as to what Bennett and why people like us are trying to do, get people in touch with their basic nature harmonically, so that we can understand our true place in the universe.
Well, this is one of the things I love about our dialogues, Michael, because invariably it's I would say that at least, I'm guessing here, but I'd say that at least maybe like a third of the time it's new. So it's like when we're talking, I feel quite happy because you're bringing like these ideas and thoughts and concepts that while they're sensible to me and they certainly seem to fit with, the different kinds of avenues and paths that I've taken. It's, to my mind, it's stuff that I either haven't come across it before, or I haven't had the chance or opportunity to dig into it, although I may have roughly heard of it. And then, for another third of the time, it seems like you and I are very much on the same page. And this is a very happy, joyous thing because we can, talk and we can kind of like, collaborate and discuss ideas back and forth. I like that. And then it seems like, perhaps a third of the time, I've had my head into some strange, Dust Bowl archive and I pull something out that you may not have heard of, before, or you may have only had a cursory, it's a very symbiotic. I like it. It works well, and I think that this is I see that you know the work of yours that I've been exposed to, and just the correspondence that we've had. I guess it's been about, has it been 3 years now? Like how long have we been corresponding
That's
for?
about right.
Yeah. So, and Michael and I have very different ways of speaking, probably to our own local circle. And it was funny because I think we had a few misunderstandings. I can be a little bit like John Candy when I'm talking with people, and I'm Canadian, so, and then Michael is American, and Michael is, my impression of Michael is that he's every bit a gentleman, and he has an elegant and a refined character, and I applaud that. And I would like to think that I do too, but I can also be a little bit, I get into these kind of like John Candy moods, and I can be a little bit off the cuff. I don't know what I would describe it, but for those that may not be aware, Michael has also worked with a number of individuals that some of our members may be familiar with that are doing work in different areas. And if I understand right, it's been a collaborative effort. Can you talk about that a little bit? What your experiences have been there?
In collaborative efforts?
Yeah, just with other individuals that are working in different areas of, say, like the sciences, or kind of like esoterica or whatever, that our members may be familiar with, so they have a frame of reference. Are you okay, Michael?
Just had to clear. Uh, I could mention a colleague that I was working with back in the 70s in this context of communication and what it means in these fields. And we were speaking of earlier in connection to how well written that stuff was. And this fellow and I did some resident experiments looking for the situations having to do with how well we sense archetypes. Given a frequency, what do you tune in through that frequency? How far can you drift from that frequency before the chain of archetypes will change? It seems that there is an approximate limit for that. And it turns out that this is an important constant in cosmological work, as I found out years later. This is something that could stand a lot more direct investigation by many people who they can understand the importance of this. And with the same colleague in other experiments, we were working just with semantics and semantic reality in astrology. We thought, as experienced astrologers, we were communicating well with each other. We decided to put this to a test. We took a list of verbs as a part of speech that seemed most appropriate to test, and checked the dictionaries to find what these words meant. We were looking to see if we could produce a list of keywords. Each of us would look at a verb that described the action of an astrological archetype, and then we went and found keywords that would describe that particular archetype. And then we compared the list to see how much coincidence there was in our words. And the shock was that we had only about 1/6 of them coinciding. I would have expected, based on what I felt our communication level really was, it should have been.
Oh, Michael, sorry, can you hold on one sec? I'm getting an error message here. Can you remember that last point that you made?
Yes.
Okay.
We found that we were communicating only a half to a third as well as we thought we were. And this really made me retrench and rethink a lot of things. I couldn't just take it for granted that our banter in astrology really was sharing anything other than hot air. The results were so poor, I said, if this is any indication, we've got to have something better. There's an impetus to go deeper into the astrosonics ideas that I've been developing, because I could see with pre-verbal forms like that, we might have a better way to get in touch. Later experiments with other people showed that there was a level of deeper, there was a way to contact deeper levels in the unconscious by using frequency.
Yeah, if you can hold that microphone close to your mouth, then we're going to be good. So look, I want to just go back because I think we missed. You were talking about, you found something.
I'm sorry, I'm very disadvantaged.
Buddy. No. Don't be sorry. Do you need it? Do you need to get a glass of water, or how are you feeling right now?
Let me grab a drink. Okay.
Are you all right, Michael? Are you okay to go on, or?
I'm okay to go on, but I just have to clear out my bronchial tubes and throat every now and then. Get a drink like that every now and then.
Okay.
So.
I think the part that we left off at is you're talking about you're doing a review of archetypal dynamics, and I think you said that you're using verbs in relation to archetypes.
Right. My colleague and I were looking to see if we could match descriptive concepts that fell under one verb heading. In other words, remember now, this is 35 more than that.
Can you hold the mic to your mouth, Michael?
Yeah, we're talking 1977, and I'm having to reconstruct what happened then. Not easy, decades removed, under the circumstances of being ill too.
Can you hold
so
it? Can you hold it? Okay.
How?
That's great.
That close?
Yeah.
That close?
Yeah.
Okay. There's one other thing I can do, because when things come up, the default values may be reset downwards. So if I check my settings, maybe I can bring this up so I don't have to be eating this thing. I'm trying to describe to you what I did with my colleague that showed me that we weren't communicating as well as we thought. And it was a shock. And further, it led to more problems because we tried redesigning the thing so that we had other protocols. We started working with kinesiology and touch for health as a way of checking at the physiological.
Hello? Okay.
Skype managed to get it back. This does seem to be an improvement in a way over the earlier versions, because they didn't try on a drop call to get it back again. Now they do. So any,
Please go ahead.
to get back to this story, we were then working with Touch for Health according to John C.'s book by that title. This doesn't make us any kind of experts, but working just at that level, we thought we were making progress and better understanding until my friend suggested that we get even more objective. We should try some other kind of test. That led to a debate, and I said, all right, maybe we can make things more objective if we measure the amount of tension being put on the muscles at the time of the touch. Because, in this method, you have your arm outstretched, and when the concept is mentioned, then the partner pushes down on it. You see how much muscular resistance there is when that happens, and if you have outside of the expected range, then there's a phenomenon to test further. So you can work out a yes or a no that way. So to try to get a handle on just how much meant yes and how much meant no, I suggested using the fish spring to check the amount of loading on the hand. Have the fish spring like so, and then pull down on it instead of just shoving down on the hand. But for some reason, my colleague, as this suggested, mind you, he was a trained psychologist with a degree in family counseling. He suddenly reacted. He didn't want to do it all, flew into a rage. And believe me, this took me by surprise too. And I should add, this fellow was also a disciple of a well-known Eastern guru at the time. And the reaction carried through to other things in his life. And because this was going on publicly, I don't want to say too much more in detail because he currently doesn't remember the incident that led to. But it caused me to back off and at that time try to get any more research with him. And so many years later, we reconnected in New Mexico, and then there was another lapse, and then years after that, back in more recently on the net. And I'm still trying to get some closure in that situation. But redoing what we did 30 and 40 years ago apparently isn't going to be any easy thing, even though I see there'd be considerable benefit to attempt it.
You mentioned something earlier. We were having some sound problems, and I don't think it got through okay. You'd said something about you were working with verbs, and that you found that there was about 1/6 of the verbs were doing something a certain way, and you said that there was some kind of potential fascinating phenomena going on with things like, I can't remember what you said. I think you said telepathy or something. What was that all about, and what was the 1/6 of something that was?
Okay, let me try to re-clarify that a little. I mean, the Mercury retrograding is steep here. It's not just the planets, it's the physical situations we're trying to encompass here. We picked a given concept area to look at, and verbs that had to do with that concept area, and then we attempted to find subsidiary words that went with that verb that further described it as we do it in our own astrological experience. And then we would compare lists of these derivative terms, see how much agreement there was. And to our utter shock, it was only about 1/6 coincident. And we expected it was going to be 2 to 3 times that anyway. And it wasn't that good. It just led us to realize how semantically lacking both our understanding was and the subject of astrology in general was. This is why I came much later to recommend people study semantics and semiotics at the same time they study astrology, and attempt to work out, clarify just how the archetypes work in terms of the semantic hierarchy that people like Korzybski had worked out. But I didn't seem to have very many takers. I don't know if there's been any follow-up on that.
And where does telepathy fit in there?
The telepathy situation comes about when you're dealing with information in a pre-verbal way, especially because the cognitive function isn't getting in the way like it is when you're trying to deal with words. To get the words out of the way and work with the basic vibrations only, then there's a better chance some of these subtle nuances are going to flow as a result. I was in a situation where I had an experience in 1985 with a woman who was having trouble with her boyfriend. And she was asking me if I could think of any way that anything I knew might help her get a better connection with him. So I said, it occurs to me what we could try is I could look at your list of astrosonic frequencies, look at his list of astrosonic frequencies, and see where you might have close coincidences. And then pick ones which seem to have to do with the issues you're telling me you're having with him. So I did this, and made up the sounds for her, but she then listened to herself. She didn't take it up with her boyfriend, she just listened to herself. And later she called me back and said, you know, I went through about 5 cycles of experimenting with this. What I found was that just after hearing the tape, my boyfriend would answer the phone when he had more. There was an improvement that much. And then later on, when I used this some more, then he got loquacious and wouldn't get off. It's like suddenly the tables were turned and he wanted to do more talking than she did, just because by working with the mutual frequencies, she had opened a space for this to happen. She said then she'd stop, not use the tape for a while, and then the situation would relapse back into what I've had before, basically, without much change. And then when she'd listen to the tape again, it would pick up. And she did this 5 times to be sure that was the main parameter, the main difference in the situation. The only one that was bringing this phenomenon on. And then working with other people, including myself, I tried this too, and found a similar effect with people that I was having trouble with. So I can tell you there's something big here that needs investigating further.
It's so interesting. I love that description that you just gave. Certainly, over the last 4 years, we see a corollary of that in the nature of the work that our group has been doing with the application of Sun and Starz frequencies. But what's crazy is, like, here we are. I think we're describing like a very similar dynamic, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to bounce something off you, and my guess is you've already thought about this. I don't know if this is what I believe, but I find this to be interesting. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
You're familiar with the whole notion behind Ho'oponopono? Like the idea basically where you've got like the forgiveness and the love and the cleansing, and then when you change something inside your head, whenever you change that inside your head, supposedly, it makes a change in your external reality. So what's really bizarre is, if people look up on, say, Wikipedia, the entry for Ho'oponopono, and they get down to, I think they call it the zero place.
I remember looking into some time ago, but I'm not sure exactly yet how you're going to apply that to the situation here. There's one point I'd want to bring up before we go into that. Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Oh, gee, dropped again. Yeah, hi, Dad.
Hey, Michael, are you there?
Yeah.
Like, I want to clarify. Like, I'm not saying like I believe in Ho'oponopono or that I would advocate its practice. I'm familiar with some of the principles in it. I mean, here you've got something that's really quite old. I mean, I believe it's Polynesian sourced, but some of the elements or concepts in it as a practice weirdly seem similar to what we see in some areas of quantum physics, not least of which is entanglement. You know,
Yes, it has a resemblance to modern psychology and how the structuring works, which is similar to what you have in Kahuna, a related system, where you have the personal self, and you have an oversoul, and you have a subconscious self. It's a Trinitarian system that way, too. But the point I wish to bring out was that I had to have a cosmically based system of finding personalized frequencies that actually was working before I could suggest to this lady that she compare hers to her boyfriend's. And I was therefore working with a personalized system in that sense. Now, when you were doing experiments, were you also using personally derived sounds or were you using generic sounds?
the approach that you and I have taken, we've never really had a chance to talk about this much, and I think that we should, and I think that if we actually did a conversation where the subject was primarily that, it would make, I'm guessing it would make for a very enjoyable view, you know, for our viewers to watch this, say like we talk about it for an hour or so, it'll probably be very, not just entertaining, but educational. Uh, I think that to get into it with justice probably warrants a different conversation, but let me give you a summary. Yeah, in the nature of the work that I was doing, I went at it a little bit backwards. I was actually developing a math model. You've probably seen some of my videos on the YouTube channel.
I attempted to do that, but let's say I ran into some problems there that I wasn't able to complete even seeing your expose about yourself. And
Okay.
I regret to say, because all that was happening just as I was under terrific pressure to get income and modify my situation. That month was a very bad one to try that with. They have to get back to that, maybe out this new system, and see if I'll do any better there.
Well, what what here's what happened with me in a nutshell. I actually didn't start off trying to make frequencies or sounds to be supportive towards health or wellness. They were kind of an accidental spin-off. What happened with me was that it's a long story, but a trust was interested in my work, and they offered to finance it, and they did a very bad job of it, so it didn't really go anywhere meaningful.
What was that work at the time? Just math?
The nature of the work was I was working on a rudimentary math model. You're familiar with, we've talked before about quaternions, like
Yeah.
Maxwell's quaternions. So for those that are watching the video that may not be familiar with James Clerk Maxwell, James Clerk Maxwell was a Scottish mathematician that was working on a set of equations that were novel and were related to, among other things, electromagnetic theory. And they are used today, although they're usually in a butchered form. There was there was a fellow named Schofield who basically chopped them up and kind of gutted them and made them like sort of like stupid versions of. But in today's industry, quaternions are often used as a simple way to rotate things. So in gaming theory, when you have people that are doing programming for games, you'll actually see quaternions in the game code, in the engine code, where landscape or heads-up display or whatever, in the code of that, in the mathematical code, you'll see renditions or variations on this. And basically, here's a really simple kind of summary that the average viewer can wrap their head around this. Most of you have heard of a gyroscope. And so a gyroscope has a bunch of circles, and one of them spinning, and then you have these forces that come off. And if you take the little gyroscope and you turn it around on your finger, it will always sort of have its inertial balance. So you could say that kind of in a way Maxwell's work conceptually was related to that as a principle or that as a process. So partially, as part of my theory, it occurred to me that the nature of consciousness had to have some sort of similar, dynamic, some sort of similar structure. And what's interesting is that, we see in different fields, certainly including psychology, the notion of archetypes. And, in a lot of the videos that I put up online, I often refer to archetypes, as being similar to a kind of chemical elements. And, when we take a look at chemical formulas, we have a syntactical complex. And so we have a syntactical complex, a chemical formula, where each element in it comprises perhaps a greater whole. And if we take a look at the nature of archetypes itself, and we certainly see this in the I Ching. The I Ching is a brilliant example of where we have a bifurcation process occur where, initially we're going from a singularity, and the singularity bifurcates, and as it bifurcates, it polarizes, but it goes into subclasses of polarization. And these subclasses of polarization have, their own inherent similarities, and they have also their unique characteristics. And for those that may be familiar with Drew Hempel's work, and I don't agree with everything Drew says, but one of the things that Drew talks about is complementarity. Are you okay? Michael, you all right?
Just having it clear. That's going to go on until all that folks take care of.
So, with Drew's work, he's very adverse to a logarithmic application to music, and even he's adverse to using logs in math. And what he claims is that a very strict Pythagorean and also almost a kind of like Taoist approach, a purely complementary approach, to musical tonality and intervals is the way to go. But for me, what it seemed like was that whether it was a very simplistic archetype or if it was one that was like a subclass archetype, and if someone's watching this and they don't know exactly what we're talking about, you could simplify this. You could say, you have a grandmother, and then you have a mother, and then you have a daughter. And if you take a look at five-element theory in traditional Chinese medicine, and a lot of TCM practitioners today, if they have a good background in the traditional as well as the contemporary form of TCM, they'll show you the constructive and the destructive pentagonal wheel. And so you'll notice that on any slice of that pentagon where you've got a triangle, you'll have the 3 points, and the practitioner will refer to it as the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter. And then they'll correspond these points to conditions in the body. And so when a practitioner is making a herbal formula, he'll try to figure out, well, where do I stimulate, where do I sedate, where do I tonify, and as you mentioned before about tensions, there were tensions going on. And so from an Oriental perspective, here's a play of tensions. And from a musical perspective, we already know that we have, for instance, 5-note scales. And interestingly, and again in Chinese traditional medicine, we see a equivocation between a pentascale and proper medical practice and application, as well as herbs. I mean, heck, 365 days in a year, and 365 primary Chinese herbs that are used in mixes, and in the mixes themselves, they will have 3 elements assigned to each formula that corresponds to those points in the wheel. But this probably sounds like a convoluted way of me trying to give you a description, but basically what had happened was I about 12 years ago now made a very simplistic math discovery, and at the time I really didn't know what I had on my hands, and I saw that it was doing some strange things, and the way that it began was I worked on it for about 3 months, and I'm guessing I probably had a few thousand pages of notes. And at the end of the 3 months, I felt like I had failed because I was trying to see if I could witness a certain kind of consistent resultant, and I didn't. And so I gave up. And then I took about a month off. And then after a month had passed, I went back. And then what I realized was that the answer or the thing that I was seeking was rarely in the resultants, but rather it was in the process of the longhand. There was a very strange, aberration, a pattern that formed in the longhand. And so I thought, like, pardon my language, but holy shit, what is this? And I tried to find it. I tried to go online, and I tried to, because my background is computing science, and I've had a lot of opportunities to hang out with some unknown and some reasonably well-known figures in alternative sciences, and I've had a chance to, kind of study or be under the tutelage of some pretty striking figures in that area, and I'm happy about that. But at the time, I really had no confidence or certainty that I had discovered anything unique or novel. So I thought that there had to have been something that existed out there in the, even in the mainstream that would, simply explain what I had found, and I would happily feel foolish, like, oh, I rediscover something that's been already discovered, a dozen times or more, and I couldn't find it. And then I felt shocked about that, and I felt a little bit scared and a little bit out of my elements. I felt like I had enough of an experiential and academic background to explore it, but I really didn't know what I had on my hands.
If it took you thousands of pages of notes to explore it, I'm wondering what was the general direction you were moving in that would have required that kind of effort?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to have enough documentation to see if I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. When what happened was I had a very odd experience, and I was trying to describe the experience in as simple a way, using simple maths that I could. And when I first started to do that, I saw some unusual things, but nothing that seemed terribly concrete. And so I kept basically scribbling out, I suppose, different examples or approaches of what that initial experience was to see if I could watch it take shape. And I'm being a little bit ambiguous here, and I'm aware of that. Is there any kind of medication that you need, Michael?
I'm working on a lot of different potential stuff right now. This
Is it your lungs? Like what?
This is deep stuff in my life. Problem.
Do you need to lie down, or?
No. Thing is, I feel things are coming to a head. How much of this is artificial? How much of it is actually what would be happening anyway? I don't know. But I don't want to get too distracted from your narrative, because obviously you found something that was worthy of the attention, and you were trying to explicate it just for yourself, and have enough documentation that you might have a beginning of getting it across to other people. Try to grasp that. I see I would have done much better in understanding what you're saying had I been able to complete seeing your expose video. So aren't you referring to the experience you were starting to describe there in the first half of that led you to this vast insight?
Michael, can you hold the mic up? Sorry.
Was the experience you had the one you were trying to explain in the videos I didn't get to complete seeing?
Yeah, you're referring to there's two videos that kind of talk about what the initial experience was, and so
yes.
In those two videos, yeah, that was the initial experience. It was. I don't want to go into that too much here because.
Yeah, you'd gone up into this altered state, and you wished to mathematically understand it to see if you could develop a model for it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So. So what happened was I at the end of the 3 months, I saw an anomaly that was consistently occurring. Didn't know what it was still, and I decided to try to like code it, like write some some simple software code and tinker with it. And as I began to tinker with it, it started to do more strange things. And and uh, I don't want to talk about too many aspects of what was going on there in this public video. But what I will say is that um, at some points, it looks like the work that I was doing there was helpful in being able to understand uh, a degree of trend analysis in the behavior of groups. So, and with individuals. And it looked like it may have a practical application. It might have an application in possibly clinical studies, like psychological clinical studies. And I was in talks with looking at getting this wrapped in different ways. Um, so I was at a friend's house, and he owns a chain of health food stores. We've been friends for quite a while, and he had a rough idea of what I've been working on. And one night, it was Christmas. I think it was Christmas Eve. And he's done well for himself. He's an affluent guy, and at the time I was like a struggling researcher, and so he had me over, and we were drinking wine, and kind of it was a happy time. It was like I hadn't seen him for a while. I'd been away for quite some time, and I really didn't have a lot of fun times in my life. I didn't get out and socialize much, so it was a nice break. Um, and he asked me how things were going, and I told him what I was working on, and he said to me, he said, "Well, Don, did you ever think about you know uh, he said, did you ever think about getting your model to to do stuff or project things rather than to just sort of trend, to analyze trends or to be predictive?" And I hadn't seriously. The math was always looking at trying to kind of project a form of outcome, and what he was suggesting was, instead of trying to simply report or detail a trend, did I think it might be possible to take a given trend and then convert that trend in such a way that it could be made manifest. So actually take the data that was describing something and then kind of put it inside the body. And that's basically how it took off. And in the process of this, in the process of studying this, I spent a number of years, taking a look at different kinds of biological vectors. So that included things like, taking, galvanic skin response. It's interesting that you were talking about kinesiology. You're using kinesiology muscle reactance type testing. And in our case, what was happening is we had a number of volunteers, probably about roughly 40 volunteers proper over the course of 4.5 years, and that would be taking thermal changes across the skin and in the body. That was the electrical fluctuation across the transcutaneous charge across the skin was super helpful, because what we found were correspondences in fluctuation with a consistency over time that was markedly valuable data-wise. And what I mean by that, you're familiar with Saxton Burr, Harold Saxton Burr? Yeah.
Yes.
So I really took a lot of leads from him, and I found that a lot of the observations that he made, insofar as things like the time of the day, the time of a lunar month, the time of the year, really corresponded with the kind of reactance that the volunteers were exhibiting, and also in relation to frequencies. So
at this point, I want to ask you if you were in touch with any of the people that had followed up Burr's work. I'm thinking particularly of Konstantin Korotkov, Dr. Korotkov.
Not personally, but when I was looking at Burr's work, I mean, that name came up, but I didn't dig into his stuff very deep.
Well, Dan Winter followed up on it, and then
Okay.
Korotkov coming from a somewhat different direction, updating Curly in photography took it further. And so the two of them working together have a system whereby Dan uses his modified ostrich egg as a detector of nonlinearities, which then Rodkov's software can further analyze. Rodkov has his own detectors too, but basically what he's got is a way of analyzing the potential pattern, but you got the curling pattern. So this is something you might want to look into.
I think Dan's doing good work, and I've seen a few of his videos. Are you there? Your image just froze. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we mentioned too much Russian stuff that was allied to psychotronics and somebody didn't like it. That's how I interpret this latest interruption.
Well, I really appreciate just the comments that you made about Constantine, and I think there's a lot of value there. And I'm familiar with Dan Winter's work and just the tack that he's been taking. And I've seen some of his videos recently, and I also think that there's a lot of value there. And I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Can you describe just some of your experience in the work that you've done with Dan Winter, and how you feel about that, and just a little bit of history there?
But before we do that, I'd like to make a comment and ask you a question off the record about something you said earlier.
Okay.
Can you do that next, please?
Yeah. Do you want me to hit stop on the record?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just that evidently when I say sensitive things, somebody's going to object and try to shut the conversation off, just to show they're objecting.
Okay. Hey,
this is just...
would you like to give a history of just the Dan Winter connection and what?
Not at this time, because there's too many sensitive issues involved with it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, anyway, I appreciate the tip, and I certainly value. I know that Dan's got some good ideas.
Right. Are we back on the recording or not?
We're on the recording now.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I appreciate that. I can certainly say that, like, over the last probably 15 years, that the body of work that Dan had up and the comments that you made was certainly something I enjoyed reviewing, and I saw a lot of value there, and
Okay.
and I thought that there were some really good ideas.
Have you had a chance to read the note about the discussion I'm attempting to participate in with another colleague about the ideas of the Barrick paper? I sent that to you this morning. You had a chance to look at it yet?
Sorry, the which paper?
Have you had a chance to see the comment note that I sent Dan and another colleague about the Barrick paper?
I haven't. No, no, I haven't. Can you describe that? Is that
not adequately. I'm just saying he brought up some basic issues that collided with things that Dan, I, and others have also seen.
Okay.
Need to be discussed at length.
Okay.
And this is without even a complete read of the whole manuscript. I looked ahead at it to see if there was any clue that these matters were going to be addressed. I didn't see any.
Yeah.
So I think these are some things we need to talk about too.
Okay. So
especially before getting involved much with what's been going on with Dan over the years.
Okay. So
this material is basic to understanding what's going on with him and whether or not it's doing what he expects it does.
You mean Merrick or Winter?
No, I mean Winter.
Okay.
I'm taking it that Merrick has done some thorough homework. It looks very much like that, and yet there may be conclusions that he's reached, which if he'd done more on, with hands, actual experimenting, he wouldn't have come to. In other words, there's things you can theorize about, but don't work out in practice.
Okay.
I've stumbled over that one many a time myself. But I'm thinking it's possible Merrick did here, because he was citing mostly other people's work that he was putting together. And if he'd had hands-on experience himself, he might have done it different, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough yet about what all he did do to make any further comment.
Okay. Well, wait, as you're reviewing Merrick's work, are you finding it valuable or of interest? Or?
Very,
yeah,
very valuable of interest. Just the way that he was able to coordinate his concepts shows a good deal of appropriate background and a good deal of artistry in putting it together. So I'd like to ask you if you please read that page or two, and then we'll continue with the talk.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And you just sent that this morning, yeah?
Right. It's not too long, but it is weighty issues.
Should I disconnect and then read it now?
Yeah, that would be good if we could.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Okay. So I read that email.
Okay.
And I just have one question for you before we jump into it.
All right.
Knowing that I've only had an average of about 3 hours of sleep for each night for the last 4 nights, you're going to make me cogitate regardless, aren't you?
Well, I was thinking of saying if you want to beg off at this point, this might be good to just let you digest what you read.
Well, no, I'm not going to beg off. I'm Scottish, so I never yield. I have to be drilled into the ground before.
Highlander, no doubt.
Yeah. But now here's the thing. I won't do it justice until I've rested. At least I won't feel like I've done it justice in the way that I. But what I would like to do is just provide. My head does feel like my head is so fucking tired right now. Like I feel like I have cotton batting inside my skull between my ears, and I feel dizzy. But I feel excited, and I feel kind of happy, and I feel kind of like I'm enjoying this. And I like you, so here we go. And I'm eating and drinking my carrot juice. So let me bounce a few.
The carrot juice, that's good.
Yeah, but let me bounce a couple of things off you in relation to the document. I get what you're saying about the Bose-Einstein condensate. I don't really have a problem with that. I think that's sensible. And a lot of the other comments that you made, I think, are sensible too. Like the part about the. Can I put that on the screen? Is that okay? I mean, is it okay if I record that? Like, how do you feel? We don't have to. We can keep it off, and I can make generic comments about it, or I can put it on the screen and the viewers can read it so they have an idea of what we're talking about. Whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Yeah, the barrel I'm over is it's not fair to your readers for us to have a discussion about something that they don't see what the basis of it is. And yet, on the other hand, I'm concerned about the privacy of the thread as far as what I was trying to work with. So
okay, well let me. Okay, well let's do this. Let me give you a general answer, and then we'll figure it out for a different conversation another time. Is that okay?
Okay, because the issues aren't going to go away. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, for the purpose of the video, like I can, like, for right now, I can give you like some feedback that won't. Because you're concerned about sensitivity, right?
I am concerned because I haven't yet had a reply from Dan or the other fellow involved.
Well, okay, so how about I give some general feedback then?
Okay.
Okay. And just for some feedback for people that are watching this video, one of the things that Michael and I do is you know what? Let me do this. Let me set the stage a little bit so that people aren't completely lost and freaked out.
Yes.
Okay. Michael and I have a very similar tact on things, and I think that in many ways we're describing similar animals, and we sometimes differ in our opinions and our approaches, and sometimes we're congruent. But, you know, you've heard Michael make references to things like astrology. Well, you know, what has this got to do with, like, science or music or blah, 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 blah? And Michael's a professional mathematician, and he's he's a reasonably, in my opinion, he's a reasonably and quite well developed mathematician, and he.
Yeah, I interject here. I've never been a professional mathematician per se.
Well, the class of
professional astrologer.
okay, but the class of okay, but the class of work that you're doing, like some of the work that you've put out, like the B4C, this is a professional mathematician level quality of work. There's no question about that. I mean, if a master's in mathematics looked at that, he would recognize this as being of that caliber. But let me ask you something. What, in your personal opinion, if you can give a summary, what's the connection? I mean, astrology. Like, if someone's watching this and they don't believe in astrology or they don't put any value in it, why on earth would someone who's as skilled a mathematician as yourself take astrology seriously? And why does it matter? And what's the point? And being able to render the kind of mathematical, having the mathematical acumen that you have, and being able to, apply that discipline. How do you justify astrology? Why do you use astrology? What's the point?
Because the astrology helped me sort out things as.
Hello? Hello? I think you're coming in, buddy.
I can't see you yet.
Yeah, I don't see me on the screen either.
Did you turn your camera off to reduce the bandwidth?
No. How am I now? Do you see me now?
Okay, you're back.
Okay.
Yes. So I started to say I was looking into astrology because it looked to be an accessible and circular, complete philosophy that I could access that might lead to more understanding of myself and the people around me. And so I started looking into it around age 10. And yes, indeed, I was finding it did give me some of the insight I was looking for. So I became more skilled in it as my experience expanded over the years. And I later decided to take it up professionally because my career in science and math had been blocked. That's a whole other story.
Okay. So, all right, now
I got interested in the astrology, took it further, and then I had experiences that indicated I should attempt to get at the scientific basis of it. I've gotten to know some leading astrologers, particularly Carl Payne Tobey, who was interested in developing statistical approaches to modeling astrology effects and attempting to learn their basis. He also was much interested in the prime number order and how that related to astrology. And so this later led, along with influences from Jeffrey Dean, to my work on what's called by being the 30 birds function, which is a generalized pattern of visibility. And then I have things up on the net, some pages with Dan Winter that'll give a basic background for that. Does this answer your question?
yeah, and I'm gonna give the viewers some feedback from my end too, so that they have a bit of a round. I'm going someplace with this, and it's in relation to answering your question. Because if we don't do this, if we don't set the stage, we're going to sound like we're speaking mumbo jumbo technical.
Absolutely,
right?
I agree.
Okay.
So please keep setting the stage.
Okay, so here's the deal with me. I took a very different approach that Michael did, but I absolutely value how he arrived at where he's at. For me, I never went seeking astrology, and I did not go kindly into that night. And I had a very poor opinion of it, and I wasn't interested in it at all. My background was primarily the sciences, the hard sciences, especially computing science. That's my formal academic training. That was the experience. I was working for a time as a well-paid consultant. I was one of the youngest consultants at Microsoft, that's what I was told for the time that I was there. And there was an associate of mine that I knew in Washington who kept insisting that I talk to this, older gentleman, and she had all these reasons why she thought I should. And he was a former professor of astrophysics at Stanford, and he had a bunch of other degrees. He'd studied things like transpersonal psychology, and he was an astrologer, but he was an unusual astrologer. He was into heliocentric astrology.
Very good.
Yeah, well, apparently, Mr. Stanford from what I understand, he was in the very top global of his field of heliocentric astrology, but he also, very few people liked him that were in his own profession. Apparently, he's a nice guy. He's a little bit cranky, but apparently the other professionals in the astrology fields, they'd always argue. You would bitch them out, and they'd bitch it, whatever. That's how it went. So I had a very bad, poor dim. I thought it was mostly junk, and not really worth my time or effort. I was very much into the alternate sciences. I spent a lot of time in the study and the building and the application, experimenting with things like royal right frequencies. A lot of the people that were in the top of their field, like I've hung out with Dr. Richard Lloyd. I've hung out at his house, and he fed me spaghetti. And we played in his lab for a while. Are you okay? Maybe she.
Trying to do this show under these conditions will probably create a pretty bad impression.
No, don't worry about it.
It might be interpreted by some people as if we're getting desperate to get the word out. Maybe to some extent that's true.
You know what, buddy? I think that what we're talking about it's important enough to warrant that we don't even worry about that. Like, the only thing I care is just like, are you feeling okay? And do you want to?
Obviously not when I'm.
Do you want to take a drink?
Myself out like that.
Do you want to take a drink? Is that if you take a drink? Okay.
No, we're all right there.
All right.
Setting the stage is important. We need to continue doing that. And I'm glad to get some better idea of how you've approached the subject and where you're coming from. That you have the background you have on the right, which is much more than I have.
Well, I mean, here's what I felt though is that you see, this fellow, this professor from Stanford, he took me on as a private student, and he taught me for 3 years, and he shocked the hell out of me.
He was teaching you astrology?
He was teaching me a whole range of things, but including, it wasn't just astrology, but it was his own weird take on things, his own weird view on things. And this guy, he had heads of state consulting him. Like I won't say the country, but there were presidents of Slavic countries because he's Slavic in background. He's an American, but he's Slavic. Anyway, I won't go into all the lengthy details, but the bottom line was what I realized was that, and it's been said before, that music and musical notes and the syntax of musical form is the quantum language. It's the language of quantum physics. It's the language of nature. It's the language of reality. And so it occurred to me that if this is the case, if in some way musical syntax is the nature of quantum communication, then intrinsically the very nature of what we conceptualize as archetypes has to play a part in there. Because we can equivocate certain kinds of archetypal role dynamics with dynamics found in music, as we can in architecture, right? Because we say that architecture is like frozen music. Architecture is just, yeah. I mean, if we look at architecture as being the representation of, the information dynamic for space, then we can certainly say that, music is that dynamic in time. And so the bottom line was that when I had gone through many years of investigating royal Rife frequencies, and in most cases with Rife frequencies, for those that may not be familiar, the basic thing with Rife frequencies is that a pathogenic organism is debilitated through the application of a frequency that's resonant to its structure. So we say that if we want to kill a germ, then what we can do is we can take a look at the oscillation of the germ, its standard oscillation of the germ over time frames, or we can take a look at a dimensional unit measure, of part of its structure, and then we would convert these dimensions into frequency, and we put the frequency into the organism. We cause its, destruction. We blow it apart. It's the typical thing is the amoeba becomes static, and then it expands and reaches its elastic recovery limit, and it the innards blow out of the membrane and it's gone. But Rife frequencies didn't just apply to modulating pathogenic organisms. We also would use Rife frequencies for things that we would see similar in traditional Chinese medicine to stimulate, tonify, or sedate bodily processes. Setting the stage here, what Michael and I do, again from probably similar and slightly different tangents, is we try to investigate areas of mathematics and maybe exotic sort of areas of music that are developing theoretically in the application of our particular studies. And the reason that we use astrology is because astrology is an imperfect, somewhat primitive, rudimentary framework of the particulate elements and dynamics of this in consciousness. So we have music is the representation of the information through time, and we can say architecture is the representation of the information through space, and then we could say that astrology is a representation of this, in a very primitive way through consciousness, because we have consciousness as part of our reality. And we were talking the email that Michael sent me. It's dealing essentially with energy dynamics. I don't know if you've seen it, Michael, but there's a really great. I usually don't watch these TED videos. Do you know TED videos? You know what I'm talking about? TED Talks.
No.
It's some kind of, to me, it strikes me as some kind of faddish. They have these guys that go on, they give like a 10-minute speech about some kind of new innovation. It's an idea exchange, and it's very kind of trendy and poppy and whatever. And sometimes there's good stuff in there, but for the most part, it just seems like edutainment. However, Jacques Vallée just did a talk, and I think you'd like it. It's about 10 minutes, and in the talk, he's getting into the physics of information as opposed to the physics of energy. And the entire talk is a lament. Vallée is saying, and by the way, Jacques Vallée, for those that aren't aware, is quite well known, certainly in the alternative tech and sciences arena, well respected. And what his lament is that we have this really, really developed set of scientific disciplines and branches dealing with the study of energy, but there really isn't a lot of information being done in the study, or there really isn't a lot of study being done in information. And there's very few people that we can point to on the world stage, even within the last few decades, where we see this. I mean, certainly we have Sheldrake, doing morphogenic field studies, but even in the public domain, there's not a lot of really solid understanding about it. Mostly, it's just pop understanding.
Well, he's another guy who followed up on Harold Saxton Burr pretty closely.
Yeah, I could see that.
And yes, you're right about this lack of information about information, and partly because it is a regressive situation like that, and partly also because the method whereby information actually is propagated is something that has eluded detection because of its nature. It's a mysterious third element. The polarization is evident, but we don't see the third element, the situation that relates to poles very easily, typically. And this is a case like that, where we have, a periodic disturbance situation, you have frequency, amplitude, and phase. And the amplitude, which is the volume, like of a sound, and the frequency, which is its pitch, are the easily accessible elements that work as complements. But this phase that allows that to happen by connecting them is the more or less hidden third element.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the main reasons you don't find too much out about it. But Pat Flanagan put special attention on that element to come up with a neurophone. So he says basically that phase is the parameter of waves that we need to look at to understand how information works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just in tandem with that, there's a few things that also kind of like I think are emergent properties that are coincident that support what you're saying and also help to flesh out the picture. And some simple examples are, I can't remember the name of the fellow, but, David Sarita was interviewing some retired fellow from, I think it was Skunkworks or something. And so he's telling David in the interview, he's saying, like up till now we thought there were four forces, publicly. But he's telling David directly, he says, we don't think, privately in, the upper echelons of government's secret science, they're saying they think there's seven. They think there's actually seven forces, and that three of these are certainly unknown to the public. But what he's telling, if I remember correctly, what he's telling David is that at least one of those other forces, at least, is consciousness itself. And then we talked about, you mentioned the issue of phase per Flanagan, great study there, and this is something that he got into decades ago, and it has every bit of merit that you've said. And one thing that's come up recently that seems to be interesting is also the issue of timber, because here we have timber as being kind of like a textural quality that has been to date left out of even the most alternative and esoteric studies, and we see.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And that was where I made some of the biggest advances in developing the astrosonic, because I got away from looking at just basic frequency as being the main object of study, which is kind of the level things have remained at with the Rive work. If the Rive people understood timbre better, it would help them advance. In fact, I later put Rive frequencies into a timbre to see if I could get a generic Rive-like experience out of it. That's a whole other study. It's another story for later. But I want to bring out that it's very important to understand the importance of timbre in psychoacoustic applications.
Sure.
Because if you don't, then you'll mess up in codec design, you'll mess up the general ability of a person to respond. Like in using codecs where there is a compression, even a dot wave file has a certain amount of distorting elements, but that and the AIFF file are the two cleanest whereby to share files where some kind of psychoacoustic response is being asked for. Because anything else is going to distort that response because you're warping logarithmic space to imply compression factor, and that warps inner space of the recipient. So I'm just giving a general caveat here, something that I'm sure almost no one else has mentioned in a public venue, and I'm saying it's time to look at this.
Yeah.
And I can give you references as to where to start, like the Mark von Stending Foundation. He's begun to blow similar whistles about this.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. I think in Manfred Klein's work we're going to find traces of this, even way back to Diana Deutsch. So there's quite a lot here to be followed up on, and the market forces as they are now seem to be almost diverting public awareness away from these important issues, so they're not getting addressed by the engineers who need to address them.
Let's. I'm going to make a suggestion here. Can I bounce something off you?
Sure.
and my reason for injecting this here is because I want to give a real world example of the kind of thing that you've just described, because I think that your description was really, really good as a technical illustration, because it's really the backbone, it's the core, and the references you gave, I know the references you gave are totally solid. For the viewers that are watching this video that may not have an immediate reference, let's illustrate it this way. Um, if anyone has ever seen or if you've ever watched if you've ever watched say a nature documentary on bats, or if you know anything about bats, here you've got this creature, it flies at night and it's hunting its prey. A lot of times some bats eat insects or things that fly in the air. And so as they're flying, they're using sonar. They emit a bunch of little chirps and beeps, and a lot of times these sounds that they're emitting are outside of the human hearing range. And so what you've got is this sonar wave. It's going through the air and it's impacting something, and the wave bounces back, and then the bat picks it up. But what the bat does is it uses something called echolocation. So it sends the sound out, and it gets a bounce, or an echo comes back to it. But because its prey is moving in 3D space and is variable, it can't just take one reading. So when the bat's flying through the air, it will dip and spin and go up and down, and it'll do it rapidly, and it will get a whole bunch of echoes from a point in space where it thinks its prey is, so it can triangulate and get a good reference and find it. But that's not where it gets interesting. Where it gets really interesting is this. It's only been discovered, if I remember correctly, within the last 10 years, that the sonar of bats is so fine and so detailed, it can actually pick up the texture of different kinds of tree bark. So when it's flying in pitch black, when it's night, and it's zipping through the night air, and it sends sonar off, it's not just using echolocation to find its prey. It's using echolocation to really navigate through its terrain well, but they get an extremely detailed wraparound, like 3D, holographic, fine detailed image of everything that's around it, right down to being able to tell the difference between a pine tree with like really grainy, thick bark to a birch tree that's got smooth, papery bark. Why is this important? Well, it's important because it really details exactly what Michael just said. And the reason that it does that is this. The equivalent of musical timbre is found in what the bats are doing with sonar acoustics in detailing the feel or the kinesthetic or the visual appearance of the tree bark. So I want you to just visualize in your mind this. Imagine that you could go to a pine tree or a spruce tree and you could rip a piece of bark off the tree and you could look at it up close and you'd see all the little fine little striations and grains. That's timbre. That is what timbre is. And it changes. So timbre is the acoustic equivalent of visual differentiation of texture. Visual texture is timbre. And probably the reason that Michael mentioned that this is being repressed is because if we actually had that capacity, to understand the world of vibration to that depth, we would have the potential of liberation and freedom in all kinds of avenues of our lives that has been heretofore kept from us. So I think I think it illustrates what you're saying.
And I didn't know that the bats had that kind of discrimination. Thank you. You might say they're getting to a level where they could become student apprentices of the cetaceans, who apparently have the ability to do such holographic imaging based on their sonar scans. They can scan a person, see how they deviate from their norm, and return a signal that helps them balance or rebalance to that norm.
Having set this stage, because you sent me an email, and the email that Michael sent was your emails are always so well written. I mean, like, your ideas are so cogent, and there's a body of work that Michael and I are both reviewing right now, and it's written by a fellow named Richard Merrick, it's a big book, and there's a lot of new ideas expressed in it. and I would agree with Michael that it's also largely a synthesis. So what Merrick has done is he's surveyed a bunch of different people's work and he's assembled it together and he's going through it and he's making some assertions. So I'm guessing that some of the
a great job of bringing together a lot of abstruse ideas in one place and writing a clear, understandable way about it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's a big book, it's well worth reading.
Mm-hmm. Some of the concepts in the book are probably congruence and in agreements with the avenue that Dan Winter and yourself are taking, and then there's probably some areas that are divergent, or are I don't think I'd say in opposition, but I would say are probably pointing to a different kind of description of phenomena. They're probably taking a different tact on how they're defining certain things. Well, how would you summarize it?
You're coming from a standpoint that maybe I need more information about, because you're apparently seeing a spectrum of grays and issues that I was perhaps oversimplifying by saying they appear to be opposed viewpoints. I was just looking primarily at the polarization aspect and not trying to fill in the shades of gray in between in that email. So perhaps you could tell me how I could get a third point of view with respect to some of the issues I mentioned so that I could fill in my spectrum of shades of gray.
Well, I think that, I think that probably the best approach, and again, my brain's foggy right now, but based on what I'm seeing in Merrick's work and what I've reviewed in Winter's materials over the last number of years up till now, and what I understand, of your approach in different areas, I think what I would suggest is that a synthesis is the best road to take, because I don't agree with everything Merrick says, but I also think that my personal gut feeling is I think that Winter's missing some pieces, and I think that some of the pieces that Winter is missing are obstructive.
Okay. Well, I'd say all of us are missing pieces for various reasons.
Absolutely.
Some of it is simply because we have yet to experience what we need to
in
order to get those pieces.
Yeah.
Then there are other things that are more pathological errors where we refuse to look at what is.
Yeah.
And those are the things that are the harder things to spot and work out.
Yeah.
So I would hope to do those kinds of things, pinpoint what they are, and then see what can be done about them. Of course, just pinpointing what they are is part of the process of dealing with them in any event.
If our approach is one of sort of like a cooperative synthesis, I think that we attain what you're speaking to. And so, so one of the things that I think in this case is that I believe what Merrick has probably done to a reasonable extent is I think he's actually mapped to a degree of detail the housing or the mechanism that Winter's study needs to rest inside of. Like for instance,
right. He starts with that Blackman diagram, the Blackman spectrum of interference, which is what is showing where the energy is going when you put out an oscilloscope situation where you have one pure sine wave pitch that is then beat against another one that is ascending throughout the process of an octave. And as it does so, it makes all the musical interval ratios in between. And as it does this in a continuous manner, then the amount of the energies available changes. It does so according to the diagram, so the clearest areas show the greatest exchange, where there's the most filigree action, then you have the least exchange. And Dan has made a study of the golden section and saying that that's where there is the least destructive interference between waves, and hence should be the clearest area. But Merrick shows quite definitely that Blackman found it was in a ratio of 5/3, which is 1.6666 and so on, as compared to the 1.618034 in the golden section.
Yeah.
And so this is a very different conclusion than Dan has, and I'm awaiting his response on this as to how he would see this or interprets this diagram. What was the actual experience involved that would justify his stance that the octave is the area of the most destructive interference, and also the tritone is part of that interference series, whereas Merrick says it's not just the octave, it's all the integer harmonic multiples of a frequency. These are all areas where there is a constructive interference where the energy adds up, and you get a damping situation when the power is at 5. And that's due to be, this is very different than what my experience showed. And it's certainly different from what Dan's showed. You get on the same page somehow.
Here's what I would suggest. I think that like you've brought up so many, honestly, like very astute points, and every single issue that you brought up, it warrants further conversation, preferably when my head is clear. But let's do this. I think that if we find points of commonality, in other words, if you take a look at something that you guys already have like a beat on, and you're pretty confident about, and you're already seeing results from, and you've already got the research and the effort and the consistency to back it up. If we can take some of those data points and we can compare them to areas of similarity in Merrick's that are still somewhat different, and we can get some overlap, and from that overlap we can get greater perspective and insight, this is a really good place to start from. So I'm going to get here's an example, a really simple example, and we can even use a third party in this particular data point, and I'll give you the reference for that. But if I recall correctly, one of the areas, I'm guessing it's in the last 5 or 6 years, that Winter was looking at was he had some kind of an egg, like an egg shape, and he was doing some kind of vitalizing something with it, growing. What was it?
He had an ostrich egg that was gold plated because gold, according to Dr. Boone's work, University of Chicago, has a nuclear structure which involves 2-3-5 symmetry. And that is the symmetry that is most congruent with the golden section, which is where the chi or life energy likes to express itself, and which ratios will enable the life energy to flow, as opposed to, say, other kinds of substances where you don't have that geometry marked in the nucleus, and the result is they tend to block this flow. That contrast of geometry and flow types is what we're attempting to investigate and elucidate further here. Now, it would be nice if the several of us could discuss this. There are semantic issues involved, which I've been over again and again with Dan and colleagues concerning how the language is being used. It's not the standard or orthodox scientific type terminology. That would preferably use something like gradients of parameters in the Bose-Einstein condensate.
Yeah.
In other words, we're talking about, or attempting to indicate in words, vacuum structures.
Right. Absolutely.
And Dan is using words like charge compression. How can you actually compress a charge? First of all, what is a charge? And then how can you compress it, especially using golden section harmonics? This was the issue we were attempting to clarify, and hadn't made a lot of progress with.
Well, okay, fair enough. Like, I think that vernacular can be a stumbling block sometimes, and I think that You said earlier on in this talk that when you get down to the pre-verbal, when you start to think about, when you start to actually kind of get into the headspace of the idea, rather than just the expression, something magical can pop up. And you okay there, buddy?
Yeah, I'm saying if you want a model of this, look at Korzybski's structural differential, where we have unverbalizable, unspeakable reality. Then we have the first sensing of it, first sensory intake, also pre-verbal, unspeakable. Then we cogitate and put a label on that. From that label, we get hierarchies of labels that move out from that, greater and greater detail and abstraction. It's further and further from the unspeakable experience, with more and more areas of perception and transit occur in the information between the unspeakable reality and the high-level abstract levels of labels we're attempting to use. This is something that I think is a tool that would be wise to look into, to apply to all these metaphysical subject areas.
Yeah.
Agree? Excuse me, go ahead.
No, please. Go ahead, Mike.
To say the philosophical background from which Korzybski was coming looks antipathetic to anything spiritual, because it was based on pragmatist philosophers' work, who were considered a branch of materialism. And this being the case, some people would be turned off by the very thought of applying such a tool to a subject matter that has a spiritual element as astrology does. So please, if you have considerations about that, or prejudices as it may be, please reconsider them. Put the tool in its place. What's being spoken of there is largely left-brain considerations. The map is not the territory, but to sum that up. But the opposite approach, the magical approach, if you will, is saying the map is the territory. That's right-brain largely. So you need to get a balance of your hemispheres in this matter. So that is a goal to be sought by whatever means. And the golden section is important in doing that. This is Dan Winter's experience, and it's mine. I don't know if Merrick had any personal experience or knew anybody who did with that. But I know this is an avenue that needs to be looked into in a lot more detail.
When Dan was using the actual shape of the egg, what did he determine was the reason for that shape? Like, why an egg?
Well, I'd be speaking for him if I attempted to explain that very much.
Just, roughly paraphrase.
Basically, he took the suggestion that the egg was going to be an interactive shape of the back because of the work of Victor Schauberger and his son Walter. You're familiar with that, probably. I think you are.
Yeah.
So Dan wanted to work using their ideas as a foundation. Okay. That's why he was choosing an egg shape.
Okay. So here's our data point. We want to get kind of like an area of commonality. I can totally see how the choice of an egg shape, along with the gold medal, if I remember what the function and purpose of what he was looking at, why they would choose an egg. But if you take a look at Merrick's book, which you can download for free off the net, it's just interference theory. It's on page. Hold on, I gotta just check the page here. Page 210, and I'm just going to read this out. He's talking about a shape called a spheno-megacorona, and this shape, it looks freaky ass, man. I'm gonna.
Spheno-megacorona is his fancy word for an aura.
Hold on. Give me one. Give me 1 second here.
The
Sorry,
Mega Corona
Michael.
is a fancy word for an aura.
Sorry, buddy. I hit a browser thing and your email showed, but just for a second, and I minimized it again. You know that email that you sent me?
Right.
It part of it popped up on the screen, but I minimized it again really quick.
So you're having to find it.
Yeah, I clicked the browser. I just wanted you to know because you asked me not to show the email.
At this time, because Dan and college haven't had a chance to answer.
Yeah.
Still
So hopefully, is it okay? You just showed for a second by accident. Is that okay?
I didn't see it at this end.
No, but it's a screen. It's a screen. You know what? I'll send you the video, you can watch it.
You mean that'll show on the finished video? Yet I didn't see it. This is hilarious.
No, it's just the nature of the program. It's just such that it captures stuff on the screen. So anyway, I'm just showing a picture of a seminal mega corona, so the users can actually see what this looks like.
Okay.
And you'll see it on the screen on the video, Michael. It's what it basically looks like is it looks like an egg shape, and the egg shape is it's truncated, so it actually has like it looks like it's been fractured. But let me just read this off to you.
After this conversation is over, I'll pull up a link on egg mathematics to send you.
Okay.
If you checked into that.
Let me just read this off so the users have an idea. It says, as this applies to our experiment, the 18 tones of each of the two Fibonacci scales over 12 octaves can be interpreted as the concurrent quasi-periodic egg shape of a seminal mega corona polyhedron having 12 vertices, 18 faces, and 28 edges. Since this geometry is constructed from 16 triangles and 2 squares, it does not depend on any cut and paste operation in Platonic or Archimedean solids. Taken as a low resolution approximation for the quasi... Oh, hold on, I gotta... Taken as a low resolution approximation for the quasi-periodic crystal of an egg, this is the anti-harmonic background shape of silence. So what we have here...
Now he said something really profound. I really want to see this shape.
Yeah, well...
Because you realize the basic matrix of space that the Greeks were parallelly describing what the Taoists attempted to describe. There's quotations from Lao Tzu about this. The Greek basic matrix had 28 elements in it, which I take it have to do in the astrological perspective with the mansions of the moon.
Yeah.
And that is a big subject. Like, look at William Butler Yeats' work about that.
Yeah. Is it okay to mention your sign arc here?
Yeah, go ahead on that.
28 is related to your sign arc value.
This is something you found.
Well, yeah, I sent the notes to you earlier, but yeah, but
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, your sign arc value is directly related to the dimensions of the moon, and the value of 28. But here's the thing.
I didn't get that. No, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Really?
Yeah, could you please send that again?
Okay. I wonder how many of my emails didn't get through to you.
We will probably never know.
Huh. It's funny because I would often send you. It felt like I was sending you an awful lot of emails, but I wouldn't get responses back.
You did, but the crunch of my life didn't allow me to do much of any of them any justice.
Okay.
So I apologize.
No, buddy, it's cool.
Realize.
It's totally cool. It's totally cool. But check this out. Check this out, right? So here we have the shape of an egg.
Are you looking at it right now? And if you are looking at this image, could I please see it? Could you put your camera on it?
Oh, yeah, okay, sure. There's actually a few here. Just give me 1 second. Can you see that? How does that look?
Could Could you bring it down a little, please? Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, and it reminds me of a partial snub cube.
It does, doesn't it? And you and I were talking about snub cubes a while, eh?
Yeah, right. It also looks like, in this view, a fraction of the lower part of the constitutor.
Yeah.
Ah, so that looks like a bipyramidally extended cube.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have more references to this? Like, is that shown, say, in Dictionary of Math?
Yeah.
Like Math World?
You know, all you have to do is go into Google Images. Just go to Google and then click on Images and just type in sphenomegacorona. But there's a really good description of that shape in Merrick's book on page 210. But check this out. Check this out. There's an Asian geneticist who found that exact same shape with only minor variation in our genetic code.
Now I'm really all ears.
So here's the point I'm trying to make. Dan picks the shape of an egg, right? He intuits this, and he's got the hunch because he's followed the lead of Schwaller and Victor's Schellberger. So he knows that has validity. But what's happening is in Merrick's work, we see the connection of the shape, but in slightly different form, but extremely detailed technically. And check this out. Merrick's conclusion, the conclusion that Merrick has, is that it's the shape of the egg that is the immediate containment vessel of consciousness itself, and outside of the egg is the cube. And he says that the cube is the resonant body, it's the de facto form of resonance, and that the egg dampens the consciousness into that. And now here's the crazy thing, here's where it gets nuts. If you take a look at some of the really weird-ass esoterica, and I'm not a big fan of Rosicrucianism, I don't like secret society stuff, but what you often see is they're always talking about and you mentioned yourself, the aura, right? It's the auric egg, it's the astral egg, it's like, the body is an egg, So the point is, if you want to find a good data point for synthesis between Winter's and Merrick's work, the sphenomegacorona is the place to start, because it's all there.
All right. Are you aware of Mitzi DeWitt's work?
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you're aware of her references to the basic matrix, and in the first book, Aristoxenus Ghost, the 28 values as musical intervals across an octave of that matrix. And those only come about because our consciousness is interacting as a byproduct of what's going on with the matrix talking to itself. It's in and itself has no parameters, but in our interaction with it, we give it parameters, and it has to be this way because of how we're interacting with it. It's not that we chose to have 28 parts of it. It's because it's able as to be reacted with its own product, us, that gave it that. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
I see you smiling.
I have a feeling that the way out is through the crossbeams. In other words, I think the way out because we got to get out of the egg. And when we get out of the egg, we got to get out of the cube. And the way we get out of the cube is it's got to be geometry. We got to ride the angle up to the vertex and pop out there. I think that's. Yes.
Various people, the Maya, Drunville, and others have spoken of that too.
Yeah.
That has to do with the dynamics of the tesseract. because there are projections of that where the main parameter that's changing is that very diagonal function. Now this gets close to the whole dynamics of the universe.
I think we need to end the conversation there, Michael.
You just got an important email, didn't you?
No, I'm being called away, and I think that we've already said enough for this conversation. Maybe we should charge people to watch the second one, hey? And all proceeds to go to the Michael Heleus Research Foundation.
Very nice. Thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah, well, buddy, it's been an honor, and thank you for the help that you've given me over the last few years.
Now, if this goes out on the net, please send me a link about it, would you?
Yeah, we'll do.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Probably be up in the next couple of days. So, hey, listen, man, you take care of yourself, and whatever you got to do. I don't know what's going on with your lungs, but get it cleaned out and make sure you're resting, eh?
I'm doing it as best I can to help them do what they need to do to clean out.
Okay. All right, dude.